Hello, my name is Laurie Smith, and this is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, the continuation. And we're just looking at the Survivor to Thrive workbook. It's a manual that the ASCA Adult Survivors of Child Abuse Morrison program put out years ago. It's free to use, and anybody can get a hold of it. You just go to their website, www.ascasupport.org, and you can download it, or you can read it right from their webpage, as a webpage. And if you want a hard copy, you can buy one, but they charge a little bit of money for that because they have to, collate it and the printing costs and stuff. But it's free to use, and they don't mind people using it as long as people don't monetize their, not making money off of it. And also, if we don't change the wording and say that we wrote it, sort of thing. So it's free to use, and we're just looking at it and running through it so that people can get an idea what it's all about for adult survivors of child abuse. And that's what this show is about. The topics of abuse and child abuse can be very disturbing. So you have to know what's good for you to listen to, and you have to make that decision for yourself. I start this show like 9 o'clock in the morning because it's the only time I can guarantee I'll actually do it. So I'm locked into it. So it's a little early in the morning to be talking about child abuse, but that was my life. I was brought up and born into abuse, and that was my whole childhood and youth. So I'm used to it. And I'm okay to look at this material, but you have to make that decision for yourself. And if you're a survivor of abuse, you need to do a safety first check before we get started. Just make sure you're safe enough to be listening, and this information isn't going to trigger you, and you're going to have like a horrible day. Because this type of stuff can trigger survivors of abuse, and especially if you're just starting your healing journey, and you're not sure. It's good to ask yourself, am I safe enough to be listening? Do I feel strong enough, or is this going to cause me to have a horrible day thinking about things and that I'm not going to be able to deal with? And, if you're seeing a therapist, you might check with them before you get involved in something like this. A lot of therapists will actually, suggest that survivors of child abuse will, or abuse of any type will join a peer-to-peer support group. But you have to make a decision whether or not you're ready for something like that. And so just, be sure you're safe, and that, you're not going to have a horrible day or hurt yourself or hurt somebody else because you're triggered by something and then, not able to cope, right? So just make that decision for yourself right now. And, if it's going to bother you, just turn the channel. You won't be hurting my feelings at all. So we're going to get right into this. We left off. Just going to start the step. It's a step study, the second part of the manual. And we're on step 6. There's 21 steps. So step 6 is, and we actually started this on on Friday. So if you want to go back and grab Friday's show there, we had actually at the very end started looking at this, but I'll just read through it again. Step 6, I can respect my shame and anger as a consequence of my abuse and shall try not to turn it against myself or others. And anger is a natural reaction to child abuse, they wrote here. Yet survivors have a hard time managing anger. They veer between lashing out or over-controlling it, not knowing when it is appropriate and when it isn't, so not knowing how to express themselves forcefully without overdoing it. You were no doubt angry as a child, but probably were not able to express the anger safely in your family. That's if it's familial abuse. Like, not all child abuse happens within the family, so they're kind of just putting that there, but we know that child abuse happens outside the family as well. So, but many times children are not allowed to express their feelings safely within the home. And so that's why they put that there. You may still be afraid of your anger because it may have been intricately connected to many of the bad things that hurt you. But bottling up your anger will also block your recovery because without ventilation, the anger may turn into aggressive behavior. And that's kind of where we left off. So we'll pick up the rest of this. And like, anger was a huge issue for me. Like I was saying, I did a lot of anger work. And way back at 2011, 2012, did the bulk of it, and was looking at the website that I don't even know if it's there. I need to go and check it out. It was called angerresources.com. But I did like several, I don't know how many, 100 shows or more on this stuff way back at around 2011, I believe. I started that. So I went through that website and just combed it because I needed to understand what healthy anger is and what toxic anger is, because I had a lot of toxic anger, which I was directing at myself. It was inward turned inward towards myself. So, this whole self-sabotaging, self-loathing, because I didn't want to hurt anybody else. So then I hurt myself. See? So this is what can happen. It doesn't always happen, but it did in my case. They said, where did the anger from the past go? Most survivors turn the anger against themselves. So this pattern could possibly be a major reason for your difficulties as an adult. Fighting, criticizing, or withdrawing from your friends, lover, spouse, or children are also likely patterns for you, especially if your family was ever violent. So we said, if you're a parent, you need to recognize how your anger may be triggered by your children's inadvertently pushing the wrong buttons at the wrong time. As was true with your parents, it is your responsibility to control your behavior and your anger with respect to your children. And that's only if you grew up abused by your parents, right? Or one of your parents, or both. In my case, it was both my parents, so this fits me completely, but it doesn't always fit everybody. So anger from abuse can, it doesn't have to be family abuse to cause anger. I mean, obviously, abuse, children don't know, there's so many feelings that are associated with abuse, and most of it's fear. A lot of it, I think, is fear. Not being able to stop the abuse, whatever type of abuse it was. It doesn't matter whether it was emotional abuse, psychological abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, whatever. It's the child is unable to protect themselves from that, and then there's possibly fear there, and the idea that it's gonna happen again. I know abuse is actually a repeated event. It can be a one-time event, especially if it's something that's really harsh, but generally it's repeated. It's repeated, and that's why it makes it. That's why it's deemed abusive behavior towards a child. Right? But I mean, even a one-time, physical abuse. Let's say a parent or a caregiver gets a hold of a child and abuses a child physically, even if it's one time, it's abuse. You know, and it causes a lot of problems for children. It really does. And then we grow up as adults, if you make it and survive, which some don't, right? Then we have to deal with this stuff, and it's not easy. Right? So they said many survivors. This is on page 80. If you wanted to grab that manual from the ASCA Survivor to Thriver workbook, it's a workbook. It's a manual. Many survivors do not express their anger overtly. In addition to turning the anger inwards into anxiety, um, self-loathing, and depression, many survivors develop habits that serve to cover over their anger and dull its impact. Compulsive eating, drinking, sexual activity, and a host of other behaviors serve to blunt the anger as well as the pain, shame, and isolation that arise from abuse. And this kind of behavior, often called self-medicating, in the case of alcohol or drug use, masks the underlying feelings and promotes a blustery but often hollow public image. That's really so true. I think that's why most people are doing what they're doing. It's to cover up something. It's to cover the pain, the shame, the whatever the feelings are. They're just naming a few, but a lot of this stuff that we do, this compulsive type behavior, is to cover up something. Obviously, because we're trying to self-medicate. That's what I've been doing my whole entire life, and I try to get a hold of it. You know what I mean? That's what I'm like. I got to stop this stuff. I'm now like 55. Like it's like time to like get healthy here and make some good choices for myself. But I don't recognize a lot of it, because I've been doing it for so long, and so I mean, I got off the drugs at a young age, thankfully, and at like before 22, right around 22. And I still smoke, and I generally don't really take good care of myself. I'm just not used to actually worrying about trying to take care of myself. So I'm working on that stuff, but it is slow. It's very slow, and but so many people can be doing anything. It doesn't have to be drugs or alcohol. There's all sorts of ways that we can do it. One of them is just not facing things, not handling things. That's another issue I have. If I don't want to do something and I think it's going to bother me, I just ignore it. Then it becomes a massive problem later, and I'm like, if I'd have just taken care of that in the first place, none of that wouldn't have happened. And it's just it's almost a lot of this stuff is fear based and anger based, right? So it's terrible, and we don't, as children who were abused, if you were abused as a child, then go on to have this kind of terrible stuff going on in our adult life. This is the issue. That's why I realized I needed help, because I was like, I seriously need help. At the age of 42, I was like, I got to get help. I didn't start doing any real work on it until 44, but I realized that I was just not handling things well, and I knew why. You know, I was like, well, it's just no wonder, being abused like that I would have issues and problems. Right? Says if you have to express your anger to better manage it, the best strategy is to externalize it. So that is to get rid of it by discharging it outward, but do it safely with maximum control and direct it where it belongs. They say at your abusers, but to me that's very, some people be like, you know, yeah, go take it out of my abusers. The issue is that then you become an abuser, right? I think there's healthy anger and there's toxic anger. And when I was looking at Dave Obsat's website, Michael, it's Mike Obsatz and Dave Decker. That's what it was called, angerresources.com. And I still want to do some more work on anger, and really, because I still have some anger that I'd like to get out. But it's got to be done in a way that isn't destructive to you or to somebody else. Because anger is it's a necessity. As a human being on the planet, anger actually is important. We do need to allow ourselves to be angry, but it's got to be healthy angry, right? Anger that's not going to destroy somebody or destroy something, because that's what my parents were doing to me. I mean, I can't say anything. I mean, I'm just talking for myself. My parents were angry. They didn't want all these children that they popped out, so they were like, you're going to pay. Somebody's going to pay for this horrible situation that we're in. It's like, well, it wasn't our fault. They were the ones that popped us out, right? So that's what I say. I mean, they brought all these kids into the world and then we're like, this sucks. You know, this is no good. Now we have to have all these kids around. And so they were miserable and they were hateful, horrible people who took their anger out on us quite often. And so I don't want to be like that. So then I hurt myself because the anger is internalized. And that's what I was always doing. Because the rage, I couldn't let it out safely. And so it was always an internal situation, which was hurting me and actually going to kill me, I think, in the end. So what I did was I started doing appropriate things, which helped me to get a lot of the anger out, which they do talk about here in a little bit, which was to write letters to my abusers. I wrote my books. That was another way to get my anger out. I'm like, I'm in public. I don't care. I showed it to my dad. I showed the first book to my dad when it came. And I was like, it's out there. It's all out there. That was one way for me to get that anger out without becoming abusive. I don't want to become an abuser. That's that whole toxic anger stuff, right? So yeah, turning the anger, into something that works is stuff like punching a pillow. You can do that. Doesn't matter if you don't care to just, if it's a pillow that you want to keep forever, then don't destroy it. If it's just a pillow that's $5 cheapy pillow from some sort of a cheap store, then you could take that pillow and you could punch it and let some of that anger out. There's ways to do it without hurting somebody or hurting yourself, right? For me, I also joined karate. I actually don't even talk about this, but I've never mentioned that, but I did join karate, Shotokan karate. And it was awesome, but I only did 1 year of it because my hip is really screwed up. I've got real problems with my hip and my leg and stuff. So it was too painful for me to keep going in it, unfortunately, because I really wanted to become black belt. Not to go around beating people up, just so I could protect myself and protect others. It's like I had the right motives. But in doing the movements, it was allowing me to get some of that aggression out without hurting somebody or hurting myself. But I couldn't keep it up because my body, like I said, I got some problems. But just things like that, that we can find, whatever works for you. There is lots of suggestions out there. If you just look around, how to get rid of anger, just type in your browser anger management, because that's what it's called, proper anger management, and learn how to actually manage anger properly without hurting yourself or hurting somebody else. It's so important because this is what then if we allow ourselves to hurt somebody else, we're just no better than they were. No better than they were. That's just being an abuser. And it's like, okay, I'm not going to be my parents, not at all. And that's none of my siblings actually turned out to be like my parents. None of us wanted to hurt them, you know what I mean? Even though they did horrific stuff to us and got away with it. But we didn't want to turn into them. Right? So we all imploded, which is really a sad situation, but it's true. And, that's not good, right? But so, if we were to have, allowed our anger to come out back at our abusers, which were our parents, we would be no better than them. Right? So this is where I draw the line. I'm like, I'm not going to be them. I'm not going to ever be that. You know what I mean? No. So I have to learn how to express it. So they say here, you can talk to members of your support network about plans that you have to, work on your anger management. These people can help you with ways to access this pent up anger and turn it away from yourself and towards the proper target in a safe manner. Practicing how to express your anger and learning how to turn it on and off will not only be therapeutic, but will also give you the skills to use your anger in appropriate ways in the real world. Because we do need to be able to use anger properly, because anger is important, like I said. It's actually a very important part of our makeup as human beings on the planet. Self-help section says, number 1, that's on page 80. If you have not already done so, make a list of techniques you can use to help you identify and manage your anger. For example, become aware of the body signals that tell you that you're starting to feel angry. Try to figure out what is making you feel this way. Is it something in the present, or is it a replay of an old tape from your childhood? If you find yourself getting angry, take a time out. Give yourself a chance to calm down. Call a friend or hotline for help in figuring out what is triggering your anger. Number 2, there are many ways that you can safely express your anger on your own without hurting yourself or anyone else. Here, they give some ideas, and this stuff is good. I've actually done some of this. One of the best ways is to engage in active sports where you can bash a ball, like tennis, racquetball, baseball. Virtually any kind of physical activity such as aerobics or dancing will reduce your feelings of anger. You can write about the anger in your journal, exercise, go for a walk, scrub the floors, whatever will dissipate the anger in a safe manner. Often more direct expressions of anger are hitting pillows, screaming in your house or car, though not when driving. Just got to be safe, right? And learning martial arts. See, I did take up martial arts or self-defense skills. And other more intellectual avenues include getting involved in public speaking and political marches and activities. And that's one thing that I did. I got busy, and I was already doing that when I actually started this work, going through this manual, because I was volunteering with Dream Catchers for Abused Children. And that gave me a real sense of sort of like power over my abusers, because all of a sudden I'm like, you know what they did was wrong, and what abusers do to children is wrong, and I have a voice and I can speak out. And it gave me a sense of empowerment over the abuse to do that, and that's why I did it. And because I care. I don't think any child should ever be abused, and I can't believe the world thinks that that's okay to abuse a child. I just can't believe that many people are thinking that that's okay. It's kind of like, okay, I don't know where you got that information, but it's not. It's not okay to hurt a child, right? Not. It's just not. Children have rights. They have the right to life, and they have a right to an abuse-free life. They actually have more rights than adults do. They have 1 or 2 more because they're children. They have the right to protection. Those rights are taken away from them all the time, And I was a child, my rights were taken away, So it's kind of like, I just look around the world and I'm like shaking my head going, what are these people thinking? Well, they're not. That's the issue. And it's just really, I love to speak out and do the child abuse prevention work. I absolutely do. It makes me feel better about the whole thing, because I'm like, at least, I'm speaking out, because what happened, to me was wrong. What happened to my siblings was wrong. What happened to my parents was wrong. They were abused. See, so I'm saying this is all incredibly wrong. It really is. But some people would say, it's life, well, it's not the kind of life it's not according to human rights. We all have the right to an abuse-free life. That's just not okay, right? So I love to stand up against this stuff. Number 3, write drafts of letters to your abusers, expressing your anger with them. You can get a lot of the anger sorted out by writing long letters that detail every imaginable angle of your anger. Whether you send the letters or not is up to you. Sending these types of letters is considered a confrontation, so you will want to give this issue serious consideration. That's very true, and you have to be careful doing stuff like that. I know for me, my abusers were passed on when I wrote my letters of anger to them because I couldn't sit and talk to them face to face, so I wrote letters to them, and I did that imaginary thing like John Bradshaw suggested, and other people will suggest, have an empty chair there, and I just read my letter to my abusers, and each one separately, like one to my mom, one to my dad, and one to my brother, and I told them everything that I wanted to say. I really laid it out thick, man, because I'm like, you hurt me incredibly bad, and that I just spelled it out, all of it. It did feel really good to do that, even though it wasn't them sitting there. It felt good for me to be able to get that out and voice it because it allowed that to come out so that I'm not in carrying all that stuff and not able to voice it, not able to get it out, right? But you have to be careful with that if your abusers are still living, and you have to think about the consequences. Like I used to talk about that quite a bit when I first started writing my books because there are consequences to this kind of stuff. If your family members are still, one of your abusers is still living, let's say, and it may not even be a family member, it could be somebody else that abused you. And then, you start going forward with the information, your life could be threatened. All sorts of problems can come from that. You may not ever get resolution. A lot of times survivors of abuse will want to get resolution in court, and get restitution. Sometimes it just doesn't happen, and then that survivor is just heartbroken because they can't prove anything, and there's no way for them to really get restitution. For me, I didn't, I didn't want to. My dad was like in his like 90, and mentally ill, and I didn't want to drag him into court. You know what I mean? I wanted to go public with the information because I was tired of carrying it around by myself, and I thought the world needs to know what happened to my siblings. Mainly, that was more of the big issue, was that I wanted people to know what happened to my brothers, especially because everybody in my family, including my family, of course my family was of course toxic and abusive, but even other people run my siblings down, my brothers, and say, oh, they were just losers, and they were just such losers, and I'm like, you have no idea what they were made to suffer as children. And so I was glad to be their voice a little bit and talk about them a little bit in the books. Most of the stuff is about me, but I am kind of sharing a few things with people about my siblings because what happened to them was incredibly wrong. You know, so it made me feel really good to be able to do that and to be a voice for them. They're no longer here, right? But it's just so sad, these things, right? So horrific. So not everybody wants to go public with their stuff, like I said. But whatever you do, if you can write those letters to your abusers, and just if you don't want anybody to see them ever, or get a hold of them or find them, somehow, some way, you just destroy them completely and get rid of it. And that's what I did because I didn't feel the need to keep those. And so I actually used some of my anger to completely destroy the paper that it was on and rip it up and tear it up and, completely demolish it and then threw it in the trash. Right? And I'm like, there you go. So it did help me. It made me feel a lot better doing that, getting to say everything I wanted to say to their imaginary face, you know what I mean? And I mean, they're not here, they're all passed on, but it did help me. And whether it would help you, I don't know. Right? But you can always, these are just suggestions. So professional help is next up, page 81. They say, because they give both a self-help and a professional help now. So if you are in therapy, you're seeing a counselor or something, you can use this as well, right? Use your therapy sessions to explore using some techniques for expressing anger at your parents' abusers. Besides the empty chair, psychodrama, and other Gestalt therapy techniques that use role-playing and reenactment of family situations are especially powerful for survivors who want to practice expressing their anger toward their parents or abusers. And I've never done any of that, but it's probably helpful for people who were never able to express anything that they felt to their abuser, whoever the abuser was, regardless of whether it was a parent or a caregiver or whoever the abuser was, right? So for me, I used to talk to my parents about this stuff. And so I don't really need to do that. I mean, I told my mom several times what I thought about how she was treating me and everybody else. And, it wasn't a good thing because it usually got me another beating, but I didn't care. And my dad, as an adult, I used to tell my dad exactly what I thought because I'm like, I was like, I don't care. I'm an adult. What are you going to do? You know what I mean? He's like, he was too old to beat me up anymore, and I was just too big. So it's like, I'm saying it. This is the truth, whether you want to hear it or not. So I got to do a lot of that, whereas maybe other people haven't. And so therefore, that might actually be handy, what they're talking about there, that Gestalt therapy, psychodrama, Gestalt therapy techniques. They said the major work, number two, the major work of therapy during this stage is to develop a flexible control over your anger. So anger in itself isn't bad. Excuse me. Anger in itself isn't bad, but the expression of it can be harmful to you and to others around you. And so you need to learn to differentiate situations and responses to those situations. Identify situations where you lose control of your anger, as well as situations where you need to use your anger more constructively to stand up for yourself. Work out new routines to handle your anger, and then practice these routines in your therapy sessions before trying them out in your everyday life. That's tricky stuff, this anger stuff, if you've never really dealt with anger properly. I know for me, it was always hard for me to deal with anger. And so quite often, that's just the issue. Children who are abused, growing up abused in any way, um, quite often your needs are not met, but you can't ever say anything about it because if you do, there may be more abuse, repercussions, as a child. So then as an adult, so we can sort of take that on as well. Like, well, if I voice my needs, then, am I going to be fired? Or is my wife or husband or boyfriend or girlfriend or whoever these people are in our life, our partner, going to get angry and hurt me or something? And there's always this idea that we still, even as adults, don't have the ability to stand up for ourselves, right? It's a huge, huge issue for abuse survivors, especially those who are really, severely abused by a authority figure in their life, somebody who had that power and that control, and could make sure that you were shut down as a child, right? And that's my case. So I had a very hard time standing up for myself. I really, as a teenager, took on an aggressive role just so that I wouldn't be bullied and stuff in high school, junior high. So I sort of took on almost like an aggressive role, almost as somebody. Well, because I was doing drugs, I was using a lot of drugs at the time, and also I would just act crazy, and so people just thought I was crazy. They just stay away from me. Maybe like, okay, no, we're not going to mess with her. She's a little odd. And I really was, but I actually was quite dangerous when I was a teenager. Like, it wasn't a good thing to try to bother me as a teenager because I didn't know how to control my anger properly. And I could handle myself, you know what I'm saying? So I never wanted to be an abusive type, but I was also like, don't mess with me. Not at all. Not after what I just came through. So that was my attitude. And I didn't like being like that, you know, because that was covering up the real me, which was a person with a real heart, a real soft heart that actually loves people, cares about people. And, that part of me was hidden away so that nobody could hurt me, see? So that's why, that stuff, it works for some things, but doesn't work so well for others. And we do have to learn how to stand up for ourselves without hurting people, right? And for me, I tend to run. That's my whole thing. Run to another country, run 2,000 miles away, leave jobs, leave relationships, leave friendships. Because if I think I'm going to get hurt, I'm like, that inner part of me, that inner wounded part of me that I still have work to do with, is saying, oh, no, they're going to hurt us. We got to go. You know what I mean? Or they're gone, one or the other. If I'm not going anywhere, they're gone. And it's like, it's not so healthy because I get rid of really good friends who love me and care about me. So I'm working on this stuff, how to get my needs met without hurting other people, without hurting myself. And it's been a long haul. It's been a long haul, like a long road. Let me tell you, and I'm 55. Like, I'm like, good, this is crazy how long this has taken me to get through this stuff. But it's because it was so ingrained in me. Because like I said, I grew up from zero all the way through with very toxic, abusive parents. So I never learned how to do any of this stuff properly. It's like I've had to go back and really reparent myself and redo it. Like, what a hassle. It really has been a nightmare. And I'm way better off than I have been ever. I'm sitting in a much better place than I've ever been. In other words, like, I've never had this much control in my life. I've never had this much boundary set where I know exactly what I'm accepting from people and what I'm not. Um, you know, so basically, I found myself, which is amazing, and I've learned how to love myself. But it took a lot of work to do this stuff, like I said, and, just to actually be able to prove whether or not these things are actually working in my life. And I still find myself doing some of this stuff, even at the age of 54 or 53. And it's kind of like, wow, why do I keep doing that? I'm starting to look for the signs of what's caused me, what's triggered me to cause me to make those decisions that actually self-sabotaging. And I'm like, oh, it's mostly fear-based, fear of people rejecting me, fear of the same old, yeah, that rejection thing, which was such a huge problem for me in my life, and the fear of someone hurting me, And I mean, I'm not so much worried about somebody coming along physically abusing me because I'm actually quite tall and quite big, and I'm quite muscular, and I can like handle myself. It's the issue of somebody breaking my heart, right? Because this is now I've let my heart come open to the world, and okay, I'm not that closed off person anymore that I used to be. So in doing that, I've become vulnerable again. See, so then that wounded part of me says, well, they're going to hurt us, and I'm like, you know where is that coming from? Right? Well, I know where it's coming from, but the issue is at this age, it's not necessary. I need to just stand up for myself and do it in a very polite way. It doesn't have to be abusive. That's what I'm saying. All this stuff can be done in a way to get our needs met without becoming irate or abusive or, you know, that sort of thing. Hi, Passaggio Olivello. How are you? Good evening. I hope your day's gone well. And just kind of waking up here. I'm still trying to wake up. I've been up for a while, but it's just not happening. It's Monday morning. I'm just like, we'll get there. So I just think that's interesting that the anger is necessary. It's very important, but we need to make sure that we're not turning it against ourselves. That's all. And I don't even know angerresources.com. I don't even want to check it out because I don't want to mess up my stream here just in case. But it's what it used to be called, angerresources.com. So that's what they had to say about that step, and that was step 6. I can respect my shame and anger as a consequence of my abuse, but shall try not to turn it against myself or others. They really didn't address shame there. They were mainly talking about anger. But shame, I did a huge lot of work in John Bradshaw's book, Healing the Shame Defines You. That was really helpful for me. And I had no clue what was going on with shame. Because, shame to me, it was kind of like, well, am I ashamed of myself? Not really, because I haven't really done anything all that wrong. You know what I mean? But it's not that. It's just the shame from what the abuse caused me to feel. And that shame, I guess, that's really tough stuff. If you've been abused in any way and it caused you to feel shame, whoever the abuser was made you feel shame. That's terrible. There's a little bit of healthy shame that's kind of necessary so that we can stay humble. They do talk about that the healthy shame, but the thing is that's not that toxic, abusive shame. The shame belongs on the abusers. That's where it belongs. Shame on the abuser who abused you. Shame on the abuser who's abused me. You know what I mean? That's where the shame goes. So the shame and the blame goes on the abusers always, never on the victim. It's not your fault what happened to you. It's not my fault what happened to me. And, we don't have to take that shame on. We don't have to take that blame on because we couldn't, as children, you can't be the one to be responsible for the abuse. There's no possible way. It's the person, whoever the abuser was, their responsibility. So the shame lies with them and the blame. Absolutely. Step 7. This is the next step up. We'll start this. We might be able to even finish it. We'll see how long it is. Page 82 of the Survivor to Thriver workbook. It says, I can sense my inner child whose efforts to survive now can be appreciated. And Yeah, whose efforts to survive. See, that inner wounded child that I used to be, I can sense that inner wounded child, right? That inner child who I was, whose efforts to survive can be appreciated. It's very important. I had no clue that inner child work was going to be so important because I actually didn't really like the idea of it. I thought it was a little bit almost, too psycho something, you know what I mean? Psychological. To me, it seemed like that's a little odd. But as soon as I really started doing some real research and looking into it, it made sense to me that that's just the wounded part of myself. I don't, whether it's a subpersonality, which they do say it is, um, it's the place where I was wounded. So it's where the trauma happened. That's where that inner wounded child is stuck. And so until I work with that and get some help with that, that's always going to be the case. That inner wounded part of myself is still in that trauma, even though as an adult I'm walking around doing my thing. Right? So it's really bizarre how it works, right? They said this step involves turning inward, away from the violence and pain of your abuse, to reach inside to your inner child and begin learning how to nurture and develop this vulnerable part of yourself. And this is both a grieving and a healing step, because what you give now to this child will be restorative and fulfilling and will form the foundation upon which you can build other changes as you work the latter steps. So this is also a step that will help you recognize and acknowledge your childhood efforts to survive the abuse. Yeah, it's a big step actually, and a lot of work when you start doing that. I know for myself, when I started doing this inner child work, that's actually where the big bulk of my healing came from. Was a program I quite often talk about, which is called My Envisioned Mind. It was Beverly Searle out of Australia. I don't have the link, but it's called My Envisioned Mind. It used to be called Forget Talking Therapy. She's changed the title of it several times. My Envisioned Mind, and by Beverly Searle out of Australia. I don't think there's an E in there, but there might be, so I'll leave it. Anyway, there it is. And that program really helped me out in a big way because it allowed me to go ahead and do this. It was a meditation, and I would go in and I would rescue myself from all these places of wounding. And I even thought about one actually yesterday. I think it was yesterday or the day before, where I had forgot about a certain situation of abuse that happened to me, and I actually went and saved myself. See? So I hadn't saved myself from that one because I didn't even think about it. See what I mean? So stuff will come later as you're working through your healing journey. You can go and you can get yourself out of that traumatic situation, whatever it was. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter what type of abuse it was. Any type of trauma, you can go and get yourself out of that and take yourself to a safe place. That little wounded child that you were, because that got no help. Generally abused children don't get help. Who's going to help an abused child? Like nobody. You know what I mean? So it's kind of, well, sometimes there's somebody decent will do something decent for the child who's been abused. It's quite often the case that it's not the case. Abused children just don't get any help, right? And so then years later, we have to go and help ourselves. So this is why that program really helped me out. It got me to a safe place. So my inner wounded little, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old, these different places of wounding in these different houses are no longer there. They're at their safe place. It was really great. Certainly helped me out. But it's interesting how the brain works. It really is. And just also recognizing our efforts to survive the abuse. That's something that I never really, I used to think, I'm tough. I can survive. I survived, I never really thought about it being abused because even though my parents were busted on abuse charges, I didn't go around sitting there, even as a young person, preteen or teenager, or even in my 20s, thinking that I was an abuse survivor. I just lived with these crazy parents, you know what I mean, who really hurt us. That was what I thought. They were just mean and they were hurtful, and I didn't really go around sitting there thinking, I'm an abuse survivor. It's the last thing on my mind. It's just, even though I knew, my parents were brought up on abuse charges because they were quite often talking about that. So I was really young when that happened. So I was 2. So I don't remember. I remember the CPS people coming to the house a couple of times. I have two memories of them coming, but Child Protective Services. But I mean, that's the only memories I have from that. My other siblings have the memories of them going to court and going to the counseling sessions and all of this. They only went to 2 counseling sessions, but they remembered that, my siblings. And they were like, yeah, they went to 2. That's all they did. And then they just continued to abuse us. So, they didn't want to change their ways. They were happy doing that. They liked their life of abuse and violence and horror and nightmare situation of people threatening to kill people in the middle of the night. And, horrific, right? So, but that's the way they wanted to live their life. And they created that for us, this hell. That's why I called my website Born in Hell. And because that's exactly what it was, is my parents' hell. Terrible. So, surviving the abuse, I mean, I used to think I was pretty tough, because I thought, man, if I could survive my mom especially, I'm pretty tough because she's pretty rough. And, it's pretty sad because the neighbors just loved my mom. Oh, they just thought the world of her. She was just, oh, your mother, we just love her. And I'm like, that's because she's not beating your ass, practically putting you in the hospital. And it's like, you should have been hospitalized several times. It's not good, right? She's not calling you names, running you down, throwing you out of the house, spitting in your face, like the devil. Seriously. I used to look at my mom like, are you like some sort of a demon or something? I'm serious. That's how she was behaving. Demonic, really evil. Both my parents were. And it's like, they were just really mentally ill. That's what the issue was. But the thing is, yeah, I can pat myself on the back because I survived that. Absolutely. But it did a whole lot of damage. And so, I almost don't sit around feeling like a warrior victor, even though the victory is mine, because I'm still here. And that's what I talk about quite often on my shows. I mention it because it is my victory, because I'm here. I'm doing good. I'm getting help, and I'm actually enjoying life now. So I'm enjoying me as a person. I'm like, yeah, I'm not that little piece of shit that they used to kick around. That's how I used to see myself, because that's what I was told my whole entire life. And so, I'm starting to love myself for who I am and embrace myself and even my wounded self. I'm like, yeah, I'm out here not trying to hurt people. And, I'm having a good life, and, it's good, right? So, I mean, yeah, we can acknowledge our efforts as a child of being abused, whoever the abuser was. Like I said, maybe not even in your family, but somebody who got a hold of you. You can pat yourself on the back for actually surviving that, right? And we can at least acknowledge, like they said, your childhood efforts to survive the abuse. Absolutely. Because it's incredibly damaging, abuse, what abuse does to children. That's why I speak out all the time about this stuff. Because people just don't know, if they weren't abused. They have no clue what it would be like to live in that, with no hope of anything ever getting really any better as a child, because there's no help. And it's just absolutely horrific, you know. That we actually survived, because many children don't, right? And that I'm still here because I didn't kill myself because of the abuse. See, that's the issue, right? So I do recognize and acknowledge the efforts that I had to make as a young person to survive that, and even as an adult, right? And it's good. They said by now you know pretty much what happened to you, who did what, and how you felt about it. It's now time to continue the work you began in step 5 by forgiving yourself for any of the millions of reasons that you may have used to blame yourself for the abuse. Work in this step means further identifying and challenging these inaccurate and outdated notions, and modifying your perceptions based on your new understanding of your childhood experience. Along the way, you need to appreciate and validate yourself for having survived the abuse. As you accept what happened to you and who really was responsible, you will inevitably become more and more accepting of yourself and the child within you. So that's awesome. That's what it is. I've learned how to accept myself, and for a long time, I really had a hard time with it. Especially the accepting sort of. I really felt uncomfortable in my skin. Like, I did an actual video. I did not a video. It was a audio on a Spreaker. I used to do Spreaker stuff because Spreaker was pretty cool and it was free. And they used to allow you to do 30-minute shows for free. Then they cut it down to 15, and I just left because I'm like, they always do that. These companies will draw people in and they'll give you this free time, but after a while, they get enough people and enough people paying for it, then they cut the freebie off because they're like, oh well, we've got money now, so all you people can go away or just pay or whatever. So, and I just didn't have the money to do it, so I was like, okay, well, I can't use that anymore. And but I really liked that speaker, so I did one of the show on that talking about being uncomfortable in my skin because I've made a lot of progress since that show. That tells you just how just in that period of time, probably from 2015, maybe 2014, somewhere in there, maybe even 2016. In the last 5 years, I've actually made a lot of progress. In that, I do feel comfortable in my skin now. So I've come a long way, but that's what I'm saying. It's like a total of how many years? I mean, it's taken me years to do this stuff. Hopefully it wouldn't take you that long, right? It's just taken me a long time, but maybe it wouldn't take you so long, right? And that's why it's important to reach out and get help. So they said, as you develop self-acceptance, you may notice that your relationships begin to improve. Accepting yourself may make it easier for others to accept you. And if you haven't yet had this experience, you will be pleasantly surprised. Allow yourself to share these new feelings about yourself with people you care for and trust. So look for acceptance and understanding. And if you don't get it, ask for it. Let this vulnerable part of you explore being dependent and intimate with someone and see if you can feel trust starting to build. If you feel afraid, try to figure out why and share your thoughts with this person. So that's just it. It's learning how to trust. It's learning how to trust myself, and my like especially my decision making processes, which I mean for a long time I was like, man, I can't make a decision that's healthy for anything. I couldn't trust myself. I certainly couldn't trust other people. So I trusted myself more than I trusted other people. But I was like, man, I don't even trust myself to make a good decision for myself. And especially in my early 30s, had difficulties with that. And I was like, this is so hard, right, for people who have struggled with this stuff. And I did finally learn how to start trusting myself, how to start trusting other people, but it took a long time. It took a lot of work. Right? And boundary work, like I said, was huge in that because boundary work does set up, what you're going to allow, what you're not going to allow. There's the boundary. Somebody goes and steps over that boundary, you notice it right away. And you're like, if you don't uphold that boundary, they're going to continue to do that, right? Because they think that's okay. But if it's not okay, then you need to tell them, I'm sorry, you've stepped over my boundary. Or you can be not so polite about it. And you can say, hey, you stepped over my boundary. And, I have a boundary set. It's very important for me, for my safety, for how I feel about relationship, how I feel about our relationship. This boundary is very important. And I want to uphold your boundaries, and I need you to respect mine as well. We have the right to say that. Absolutely, we do. Because you need to feel safe in all situations. You can't trust everybody. Look at the murderers out there. There's people murdering people all over the place all the time. Just random murders. You can't trust everybody. No. Look at all the people, the narcissists, the people we'll get involved with in relationships who are so good at manipulation. My parents were both, I would say, not my dad so much. My mom was a narcissist big time. She was diagnosed as a sadistic narcissist. She loved to hurt people. It was just fun for her. She got a kick out of hurting somebody, like in any way, physically, emotionally. It just fed her. She loved it. That's sad, but that's a terrible mental illness. And she was very mentally ill. So there's all kinds of really hurtful people out there. So as a survivor of abuse, you just can't open up your heart and open up your arms and say, I just want to love everybody now. I've opened up my heart. I let my walls come down. I just want to have friends. And, no, you got to do the boundary work, man. And you got to set your boundaries, what you're going to allow in your life, what you're not going to allow. I went through and I made a list. I'm not allowing anybody to abuse me ever again. And I'm going to demand an apology from somebody who hurts me because I'm going to have to apologize to them because sure enough, they're going to ask me for an apology if I hurt them. So I'm going to make it the same for me too. And I'm going to uphold that. So those are really strong boundaries, but they are necessary to protect myself. And we all need to be able to protect ourselves in any relationship. It doesn't matter whether it's a working relationship, boss, coworker, people at work. can be hurtful. Like if you don't set a boundary there, it's not okay to let people mistreat you. It wasn't okay as a child. It's certainly not as an adult. We have the right to stand up for ourselves. We really do, without becoming an abuser. That's the issue. We don't have to become the abuser to stand up for ourselves. We can do it without hurting somebody. We can learn how to trust and get our needs met, right? So boundary work was huge, like I said, and I still kind of work on it. Because every now and then something will happen, and I'm like, oh, I kind of didn't get that one right. It's like, okay, I need to go back and do some boundary work. And it is important, right? To make sure that we're not being taken advantage of, not re-victimized, and that our needs are going to be met, just like other people will do for themselves. It's very healthy, and we need to do it, right? And so many times people growing up abused, if you grew up like myself, growing up abused, there were no boundaries. I didn't grow up with any boundaries. There were no family boundaries. So anybody could do anything to anybody, and it was fine. Like somebody could come up and hit you or hurt you. And I remember in my brother's case, he was allowed to rape me, and there was nobody saying no, and there was nobody going to get me any help or do anything about this stuff. And there was no boundaries whatsoever. It was all out abuse, and all abuse went, right? So boundary work is very, very important, especially for survivors. How many minutes do we have here? Oh, we've got about 7 minutes. So we'll do the self-help section. So number one, they say, pick one photograph of yourself as a child that you especially like, frame it, and put it where you can see it often. If you don't have a picture and cannot get one from family or relatives, try drawing a picture of yourself as a child. Don't worry about it being a good picture. They said it may be better to let your inner child draw a child's drawing. If it fits, put it on your refrigerator. And that's just so that we can acknowledge who we were as a child, right? They're saying, I can sense my inner child whose efforts to survive now can be appreciated. So that's looking at that picture of ourselves as a child and really appreciate who you were, the efforts that you made to survive the abuse, whatever type of abuse it was, and really allow yourself to honor what they went through, by honoring their strength to try to keep going, and to try to get through that, right? So important. Number two, if you have children, this is a good time to renew your relationship with them and to plan some activities that allow you to be a child along with them. So if you don't have children, or if you have some extra time, consider volunteering at a daycare center or school. Let yourself enjoy childhood from your new vantage point. They said, use your time with children to let your inner child come out and express itself through the activities of healthy childhood. Drawing, telling, and listening to stories, playing games, singing songs. Enjoy this inner child and reclaim it as an important part of who you are today. And I think that's kind of, it's easy if people have children. That'd be easier if you have your own children to do something like that, to allow yourself to be a child with them and to play and stuff like that. If you didn't have that as a child, like it's kind of whatever you didn't have as a child. So if you didn't have a childhood where you really felt like free to just play and enjoy things because of the abuse, you can do that as an adult. I've done that. I've bought coloring books as an adult. After I started my healing journey, I bought coloring books and crayons, and I just allowed myself to color with my non-dominant hand, and that way my inner child, that was her coloring, so it wasn't perfect. I mean, if I do it with my dominant hand, it's going to be in the lines, it's going to be pretty. If I do it with my non-dominant hand and just let my inner child do the coloring, then it's her coloring and it's messy and it doesn't matter if she's out of the lines. And it's like, just that, I don't, things like that. It's like whatever works for you. Not everybody would want to do that, but for me, it really was pretty cool to do that, to go back and do some things like just coloring, drawing, painting. Some people like to paint. Some people like to work with clay. I really like clay myself. I like clay for some reason. It just works for me. But not everybody likes clay, or just everybody's different. So whatever works for you. You can go out and do something that you used to do as a child, or maybe that you weren't able to do. Whatever it is, and just get in touch with that part of ourselves that was from so long ago, however many years ago, that just wanted to be a child, and just wanted to play and just wanted to have fun and didn't want to be abused and didn't want to be hurt and wounded as a child. So, because we were, as a child growing up in that, if you didn't get any help, which many children don't, like I said, I was still playing. I'll just use myself for an example. I used to play because we had toys. Like I said, my parents they weren't the type to like lock us in the basement, with no toys, no food, no water, nothing like that. It wasn't like that. We had toys and stuff. We had a few toys. We didn't have a lot because my parents weren't not well off, and they couldn't just buy us all kinds of stuff. But they managed to have some toys around for us, and we always appreciated it. My sister would kind of trash the toys. Like she would, ruin the toys. She would like cut the toys, like all the dolls. My sister would cut all their hair off, stuff like this, and whatever. It didn't really matter because it's like something to play with. And we used to like to play. I used to like to play, but there was always the abuse there too, and so I never felt comfortable in any room that I was in the house because that's where the abuse took place, was in my home. So as a it was just always so, my nerves were so shocked from the abuse and from my parents' abuse towards each other, the fighting, the domestic violence with my brothers. My brothers were quite often doing drugs and all kinds of problems with them. And it's like my nerves were just shot, really. So I couldn't play probably as I would have wanted to, freely and openly and just having a good time. Sometimes it'd be at other friends' house playing and stuff like that. And then that was always a little bit better. At least I was in a safer environment. But it's like, it's hard, right? So, I mean, I have done some of that. And especially with the coloring books, that kind of thing. And I also still like to do certain types of artistic type stuff. But I'm not an artist, so I don't even try to be. But it's just fun to allow ourselves to do stuff that we would maybe really like doing and get to do as a child, right? That's to honor our inner wounded child, right? That's still there and, still very much part of our life, right? Number 3, at ASCA meetings, share how you are trying to nurture your inner child. And the next step is professional help, page 83. And we'll pick that one up next time. This inner child work was really important for me. And I just remember, because my memories are so intact. I remember even a lot of the clothes that I used to have, like the clothes that I would be wearing, right? And so I can see these little inner wounded parts of myself inside when I look inside internally. And they wanted love, they wanted care, that's all. They wanted all these wounded parts of myself just wanted to be loved, just wanted to be cared about, and didn't want to be abused, right? So I've done that inner child work, a lot of it with my envisioned mind, like I said, and it's a meditation that I have to keep up. You can't just let it go. If you do, it falls apart. It's an internal, mental, psychological thing. It's because it's in your head, right? So it's in your brain. So you create this safe place. So if you don't keep it up, it tends to fall apart, and you have to start again. It doesn't work as well. So I maintain it all the time. And sometimes, I'll go for a little period of time where I don't go in and do meditation, but generally I do try to keep in touch with that thing that I've created for myself, which is a safe place for me. And that was such a great thing to do. It really made a lot of difference because all of a sudden that trauma, the limbic system, the trauma that was stored in the limbic system up in my brain there, that's gone. See, whereas I used to have flashbacks of the abuse, intrusive flashbacks because of the violence and the abuse. I can still remember it, but it's not coming at me like an intrusive flashback anymore. If I want to remember it, I can. If I don't want to remember it, I don't have to think about it. Whereas before that wasn't the case, and it was always really traumatic for me to remember that. So it's just if you don't do the inner child work, that's fine. Everybody's different, and we all have different things to do. But that's what that step is talking about, inner child work, right? And there's tons of info out there about it. Even John Bradshaw's got that Homecoming, Healing and Reclaiming Your Inner Wounded Child or whatever. I did that book as well. And there's tons of information out there about inner child work, right? So if I can help you with resources, let me know. If I can help you find something, or if you need just, any information that I can help you get a hold of me. My info's in the About section there. And I wish you a really good day. We'll be back on tomorrow, same time, same place. Hi, Wanda. I hope you're having a good day so far. Good morning. And I hope you all have a good day and take care of yourselves. And I always say, just in case, because you never know who's watching. So watch this video but have never seen the others. That's why I say this at the end of all my stuff. Because if you're struggling and you're having a hard time and you seriously don't know how you're going to make it, you just can't do it. You're thinking, I just can't do this. I can't do it anymore. You seriously need to get You need to call a crisis line. You do. Because that's what I'm going to do. And I tell people this every single show. Because it's so important to me that you stick it out and you get some help and you do not be destroyed by your past. You do not be destroyed by the abuse. What happened to you should have never happened to you. What happened to me should have never happened to me. But now I am stuck with it. Not my fault, but now if I wanted to learn how to live because first until the age of 42 I wanted to die. So, and two of my siblings took their lives. So I mean, this is just the issue. I know so many people have committed suicide over the years. So I seriously want you to stick this out. Get some help. Don't suffer. If you're struggling on your own and you don't want to be struggling on your own, and you just think I can't do this, you call a crisis line. That's what I'm going to do. Like I said, I get a couple of years down the road and I have a serious, fall into a depression and I can't get out of it, and I'm thinking about committing suicide. First thing I'm going to do is grab that flipping phone and I'm going to make a phone call. And if I don't like the person on the other end of that crisis line, I'm going to hang up on them and I'm going to call another one, and until I get somebody that I actually like talking to. Absolutely. Because you do not deserve to go down because of what somebody did to you. Neither do I. So we deserve so much better, right? We have to make sure that happens. That's why I want you to come back and stick it out with me. So have a wonderful day, everybody. Thanks for being here with me. Talk to you tomorrow.